The guys who really know what they're doing and they do this every day are going to watch this video and say, Anton, that is so simplistic. Why are you encouraging people to blow up their engines? Leave this to the professionals. Hey, welcome back to GT Canada. Today we are covering off a video that I told you was coming. At long last, this video is finally here. Now, what am I going to cover in this video? Well, a lot of you may know already through watching my other videos that I used to own a Nissan Skyline R32. And while I owned it, I dabbled in tuning and just kind of playing with tweaking that car out a little bit. I didn't get super crazy like some of you guys are, but it still was a good opportunity to get involved in the tuning scene and everything. And I learned a lot in my experience with specifically with tuning those cars. I did have a background in tuning prior to that. It was easy to make that jump. But I wanted to share with you guys what exactly I did to tune the Nissan Skyline R32. In my case, it was the RB20 engine, but the principles that are applied here will work on just about any Nissan, specifically your Silvia, your 240s, your 180s, your Skyline R32, so that would be RB20 and RB26, and a couple others in that era. You can also do a 300ZX. All of the really interesting Japanese cars that a lot of you are starting to import into your country, especially in the States with your 25-year import rule, those cars are just fresh for you guys. This video is going to cover how you can squeeze out a little bit extra performance from that car without having to pay hugely high prices at a tuning shop. Disclaimer on this: if you follow this video, you will be changing ignition maps, fuel maps, you could be changing injector sizing and airflow meters. You have a very real chance of completely destroying your engine. Now, I'm going to show you general guidelines that are very safe, within the safe range of tuning. There's more gains that you could get there if you wanted to push it a little bit harder, but I'm just going to give you a safe, streetable tune when we're done here. If you haven't seen my Nissan Skyline video, I did a car story about it. You can check that out up over here. I'll tell you all about my experience driving a Skyline. It wasn't that great, but it still was a fun car to own. Things that you're going to need in order to do this tune. You're going to need a number of things. So I'm going to cover off the hardware side and then the software side. You can modify your existing ECU to accept a chip. It's not difficult, but it is kind of outside of the realm of what most people want to do. So in that case, you must have a socketed ECU. There's no way around this. It has to be a socketed ECU. Okay, so what I'm looking at here, this is actually a already modified HKS ECU. You can see in this bottom corner right here, that is where the factory chip resides normally. So this, as I said, this has already been modified to have a removable socket. It's called a ZIF, a zero insert force socket. There's this little lever here. You would lift that lever up, it unlocks the pins and allows you to slide the chip in and out. If you are planning on doing a lot of tuning where you're back and forth, pulling the chip out, flashing a new chip, and then putting it back in, one of these ZIFs would be great so that you don't damage the chip. You don't need a ZIF, you can just use a regular socket. Here I'm looking at an unsocketed ECU. So what you'll notice is down here you've got your chip and it's soldered right to the board. And I'm going to zoom right in so you can see this here. You can see these pins. There should be 28 of them. It's a 28 pin Eeprom. So what I normally do, I'll tell you real quick what I do, because what I do is easy, but you can screw it up and it will destroy your ECU and you'll need to find another one. But what I would do is just take a Dremel tool with one of those little cutoff wheels on it. And I would cut right across the top of these pins, all the way through, so that the pins are all independent of themselves. I would do the same on the other side. On this side, you'll have another 14 pins, and I would cut both of those so that this chip can just be pulled right off. And I would just pull the chip off, throw it in the garbage, I'm not going to need that for the next step. That allows me to have just a bunch of little legs sticking up or through the printed circuit board. And then all I do is just use a regular soldering iron. You can get them at Costco, Princess Auto, Harbor Freight, whatever, just a cheap 15-watt soldering iron and a pair of pliers. And I would just hold the end right here of the leg that's just sitting there by itself while I heat the backside with the soldering iron until it can pull out. And that's it. And I would do that for all of them, get all the legs out, then you can clean it all up with some soldering wick or a solder sucker just to make sure all the holes are clear. That was the easiest way I could find to get the existing chip out. Once it's out, we need to insert a socket, which you can see right here. This is a socketed ECU. And again, this installs the same way as the chip. So all you do is stick this socket in, add a bunch of solder on the backside. Once it's all soldered, it's good to go, it's ready. So you have now prepared your ECU to be remapped. We're not really doing a full tune in the sense of what they're doing these days with remapping ECUs because they were very basic back then. Keep in mind that the first Nissan 300ZX, when it was tuned, the only thing they did was got in, found out where the top speed limiter was and removed that and then ran it at a track. And everybody was blown away that you could now drive this car faster than what the factory allowed you to drive it. That was the first remap. That was the first tune. Since then, guys have dug in further. They've uncovered all of these maps and they've created great software to allow you to actually use that. So now that your ECU is prepared, I'm going to talk about the hardware you need to actually program it. So you need to get programmable chips. You can get Eproms with two E's, Eeprom, or you can get Eprom. The difference between them, an Eeprom means it's electrically erasable, and that means that you need a special programmer that can fire off a signal to it which zeroes out all of the bits and allows you to program over top of it again. The easier ones to get are the Eeprom, which is one E, and those ones are erasable still, but you need a UV light, like a tanning bed, that you can stick these in. So there's a cost that comes with both of those. You pay a higher price to be able to reprogram multiple times electrically, where you just drop it in your programmer and go. This is a picture of a regular Eprom. So you can tell the difference because it's got this little window in here. That window allows the UV light to go in and to reset the chip. You could leave these outside and they will reset, which is why a lot of programmers, they use Eproms. And then when they're done, they put a sticker over top of the window to block the UV light so it doesn't accidentally get erased for whatever reason. You would have to leave it outside exposed to the noonday sun for about an hour before you would have this reset. And that's why people use just little reprogrammers which have a couple of UV light tubes in them. And I found that I could stick those in for 7 to 10 minutes and it would erase them. I usually did, I think, about 12 minutes just to be sure they were erased. And then I would read them to make sure they were all zeroed out. If they're not zeroed out, it will create problems. You can buy used chips on eBay for very, very cheap. There's a lot of old electronics that still use these Eproms. And so they're easy to come by a bulk lot. I bought hundreds of them and they were very, very cheap. They're only a couple dollars each. Eeprom would be this guy right here. You can tell that it's an Eeprom because first of all, there's no window, but also the number. This is 29C256. That means that it's electrically erasable and 256 is the amount of memory. You need a 256 chip. That is what the factory chip had in your car. So you need to match that. You can go for a 512 chip, and you can do some awesome things with that where you bend the pins out and attach a switch, which allows you to switch from a low map and a high map. So you could have a low octane and a high octane. You could have a different rev limiter. Valet mode is a popular one where you set a rev limiter of like 2,000 RPM. So no one's bagging on your nice car when they're borrowing it or whatever. They can still drive it. You can drop the speed limiter to say 60 miles an hour and then have another program where you flip the switch. You get full RPM, speed limit reduced or speed limiter eliminated, and your custom tune for you. So there are options with that. I'm not going to cover that because that's a more advanced thing to do. And if you know how to do that already, you're doing it already. You don't need to watch this video to know what I'm about to show you anyway. So 29C256, that's the electrically erasable. 27C256 is the UV erasable chips. So those are what you need. You also need a programmer. Now, I use one similar to this. I got it on eBay, and they're all basically the same. The only thing to check for is make sure it supports Windows 10, and that's it, really. Everything else is pretty standard. It'll come with its own software and everything. So you just need something. They'll cost you about $100. So for all the hardware that you need, you're looking at the programmer, and you're looking at a couple of chips. It's like $120 all in. If you're adding the ZIF socket to it, those are, I don't know, about $10 or $15. So, I mean, for under $150, you will have all of the hardware requirements that you need to put in a custom tune in your R32 GTR or other Nissan product. Now that we've covered that, you have all of that done. You've got a ECU that's ready to accept your new programmed chip. You've got all the hardware you need to be able to program the chip. Now we need a way to actually create our own program. What you want to do is go to z31.com/prom/live-edit. The software that we're going to be using is called live-edit. It's specifically programmed for your Nissan vehicles of this vintage. This software works really great. It's very simplistic, but it has everything you need to be able to do the basic things that you're going to want to do here. So you're going to download the beta 2 and the beta 5. So once you've got it, you just download, you run the live edit beta 2, and then you're just going to run the setup. Then it's going to copy your files. It's going to want to save those. Now I've already installed it, so it's going to give me some errors while I do this, but you won't get those. So you just click yes, live edit. I'm going to say no to all, and there. Now it's installing. There, live edit was installed successfully. Awesome. Now we're going to go to live edit beta 5, and all we want to do is copy the liveedit.exe, copy that, and then you want to go to your C drive, and in here there's a folder now called live edit. You're going to go into the live edit and just paste, and then when it gives you an error saying, hey, do you want to replace this? Yes, I do want to replace it. That will allow me to run the live edit beta 5 with all of the everything else that we need. The nice thing about this, while I'm looking at this, in the AFM folder, this is the actual airflow meter files for all of these vehicles. So you've got a CA18DET, you've got a Q45, RB20, RB25, RB26, S13 with a CA18, and an S13 with a SR20, and an S14 with an SR20, and an S15 with an SR20, and a Z32, which, as you should know, is a Nissan 300ZX. So there's a lot of really great cars, and this covers a lot of really great time periods of cars, and I know a lot of you are loving these cars, and this is one more thing that's going to unlock a lot more fun for your car. Config files. I'm going to show you what we need here, but the nice thing is there's other softwares out there. Yes, there is. But they do not include the config files. This software includes all the config files and everything you need to start right now. You don't have to find anything else anywhere else. I recommend that you go to that z31.com and get this software. I was surprised to see that it still is up. This is old software. It has not been updated in years. It will disappear one day. I have copies on my computer. If you're watching this video and this link is not working anymore, put a comment below, reach out to me, let me know, because I will rehost these files. They are that important to this community in this generation of cars, and I don't want to see this tool go away. So that's what this covers here is the config files. So this tells the software where the relevant data is, because it's in a different spot in each ECU. So it'll tell the software this particular bit is the speed limiter. This is the rev limiter. This is your fueling map. This is your ignition map, and so on. And it's different depending on which ECU you're running and depending on which vehicle and generation you have. So it's important that you know that information. I don't want to lose everybody on this. I was hoping to make this simple enough that you would be able to follow along and have the confidence that you could do this yourself, or at least try with it. So let's run the software, okay? So we double click the software, It's going to say, do you accept the license conditions listed in license.txt? Sure, you can read that if you want, but if you don't accept them, then you're not going to get in. And this is what the software looks like. Now I'm going to load. There's a couple things you got to do. So the first thing you need to do is load engine config file. Okay, so we're going to do that first. So we're going to say load engine config file. Now I know I'm working on an RB20 engine because that's what I did the tune on, and that's what I'm going to be walking you through. You can pick, if you have a GTR, R32 GTR, pick GTR. If you have a GTIR, like a Pulsar, you just pick that. If you have a car that runs a CA18 DET, pick that. If you have a S14 with a SR20, pick that. Or you can just pick a straight up SR20. Okay, so I'm going to pick the RB20 because that's what I have. We're going to click open. Now you'll notice this all zeroes out because it's saying, okay, we know where everything is. So now I got to load my bin. So we're going to say load ROM image. Now in here I told you guys we've got factory ROM image from all different vehicles. So my GTST is what has the RB20. So I'm going to pick that. And now you can see the map. This is the meat and potatoes of what runs your car. Your car runs off of this information. So we've got our fuel map, we've got an ignition map, we've got a fuel knock map and an ignition knock map. We've got our airflow meter, we've got an injector adjustment calculator, and miscellaneous. I'm going to tell you a couple areas to stay out of. A lot of tuners are confident enough that they will adjust the fuel knock and the ignition knock map to match what your fuel main and ignition main are. I'm going to tell you a little bit about knock real quickly. Here's the thing that happens when your engine knocks. So knocking, without getting too technical, you've got an engine, okay? And the piston goes up and down. Knock is when the piston is on the way up and the gas ignites too early. Now there's a couple things that will make the gas ignite too early. If we set our timing advance too aggressive, it would sound like knock when the engine is actually firing the cylinder at the time that you told it to fire. But it would come in the form of knock, where the piston's coming up still, you try to slam it back down and it is pushing back down and then humps up over top of the compression stroke. You don't want to do that. So what a knock map does is as soon as the engine detects knock, it increases the fueling and it pulls back the ignition timing. The reason it does that is because that makes it run safe again. If you want to keep your engine safe, leave the knock maps alone. You don't want to shred an engine because you got real cocky. The downside to leaving the knock map alone is if you run poor quality fuel or you have dirty spark plugs or something like that, you could start to experience knock as well. And then you won't be using the optimal settings that we set up on the program. You will be running on the knock map. You'll be significantly down in power. And that's why a lot of tuners say, screw it, I'm gonna give you all the power all the time and you can shred your engine if you want to. Who am I to judge? I don't like shredding people's engines, so I actually usually make the knock map more aggressive. So I'll actually go on to here and I'll usually pull a couple degrees of timing. And it's just that easy. You can go highlight whatever you want to change and it's just pressing the plus or the minus key. So I just pressed minus, now I can press plus and add it all right back. And you can see the graph on the side changing and I can keep changing as much as I want. You see that? So I'm gonna go with less timing and my fuel is probably okay. I'll compare that to my main map. It's in the higher end where it's going. So we'll leave the fuel alone, okay? That's all you're gonna do on those. The airflow meter, I'll tell you what it does, but I'm not gonna play with it today. If you wanted to put bigger turbos on your car, you would flow more air. And a lot of the AFMs peak out soon after you are running more boost. And so a lot of guys are looking for a different AFM. A lot of guys, if I remember correctly, were running the Z32 AFM because it had a little bit more range in it. But it doesn't matter what AFM you want to put in. All you got to do is just pick the one that you want. You can see it's got different curves here. And then when you find the one that you're going to use, so if I'm plugging like an RB26 AFM into my RB20 engine, I would just say RB26 and then commit AFM changes, and then it would adjust stuff in the background so that that car will run. I'm not going to play with that. I don't think you should, because most people that are doing this are just doing it on a stock car. Maybe it's got an intake, header, exhaust, and basic bolt-on upgrades. You're not going to the track. You're not going like all out. This is just looking for a little bit of extra fun with your car. So we're not going to touch that. The injectors. You can put bigger injectors in your car, and it's very simple. You just pick the size of the injector right here. Your car does not have 550cc injectors. I don't know why it has 550 in there. So this says that your factory injector is a 270cc. That sounds about right. So all you got to do is just tell it what it is. If you're running 340s, you just say 340, recalculate, and then there. It'll change all the settings for your injector trim and your injector response. You can fine tune those if you want. If it doesn't run quite right, you can change these settings to be whatever you want, which is a beautiful thing to have. I'm going to put this back to 270 because that's what it should be. The fun part for you is going to be here in the miscellaneous. The fun thing here, you got your speed limiter, and I'm going to change that. Now, the speed limiter, when they say I've removed my speed limiter, you've never really removed it. You just set it to a number so high the car would never reach it. So in this case, it maxes us out at 400 kilometers an hour. Odds are your Skyline will never do 400 kilometers an hour. So you have essentially removed your speed limiter at this point. Keep in mind, the first tune done on a Z32 Nissan 300ZX was just this. They bumped the speed limiter and that was all. So you have now done the same amount of tuning as what they did in the early 90s. Congratulations. You can also adjust your RPM limit if you like. I usually bumped it to 8,000. Not for any good reason other than the fact that some guys like to rev slightly higher so that when they shift, they can fall back into a specific rev range where they know they're making power. If you know that you need a little bit more RPM before the shift to land in the right RPM after the shift, that's where you're going to adjust that. You can cause serious engine damage by over revving the engine, and you should do this carefully. 200 RPM won't make a lot of difference, but if we bumped this up to 9,000, you might throw the engine apart. So don't just pick numbers. That only leaves 2 sections left to look at. Now, the old tuners back in the carburetor days, they knew that if you wanted to get a little bit more performance, you would turn the distributor cap to advance the timing. That trick still holds true with fuel-injected engines, but you have no ability to advance the timing. Even if you turn the distributor cap, if you have one, most of them run ignition coils where the computer says it's time to fire. It gets the signal off of a crank position sensor and a cam position sensor. So you can't just turn that distributor cap, but in the software we can. So the first thing that we need to understand when we're looking at these cells is where the car accesses the information, because this is just a lot of information. So here's how I understand it. This point right over here, these 4 cells actually, is idle. There's not a lot of airflow. There's not a lot of RPMs. Okay? I like to think of this scale as throttle position. Sometimes it is actually throttle position. Sometimes it's airflow. Sometimes it's something else. Think of this as throttle position and then think of these numbers as percents. I know it goes up to 105%, but let's just pretend it's percents of throttle position. So when the car is running and it's sitting idle, there is 0% throttle position. And how many RPM are we at? We're going to be somewhere between 400 and 800 RPM at idle. So this is your idling fueling, and this is your idling timing. So you'll see that the computer only runs 5 degrees of timing advance at idle. Now the computer actually uses 4 cells and averages them together most of the time and takes that averaged number so that you get a smoother acceleration, everything. That was what they did in the old days. Nowadays on the newer stuff, they might do specific cells, but I know that on the old ones, they were combining and taking an average. Now this software does have target air-fuel ratios. It does have estimated injector duty cycles. It does have estimated horsepower, which as you can see is grossly exaggerated because the RB20 does not make 300 horsepower. And then it has the raw data. You can adjust these based on whatever number you want. I just find a number is a good number to have. The air-fuel ratio is typically where I'd be looking, or just the raw data, because the numbers are a little bit easier to look at. That's all. So we've covered idle. Idling is here. What about when you're at the light and you take off and you are going for a race and you're working as hard as you can? The interesting thing is, so we're talking about here, this is throttle position, right? So you put your foot on the floor, what happened? You went to 100% throttle. Now, as you're at 100% throttle, the RPMs will climb through the RPM range. So really, when you are in a full throttle situation, you are only accessing this part of the map. So when you're tuning, and this brings back the point that I made in one of my videos with the Travis Pastrana, Jim Connor behind the scenes video where they're talking about a streetable car versus a dyno tuned car. This is the difference. When you dyno tune a car, and if you haven't seen the video, I'll put a link up here, you can check that out. If you're dyno tuning a car, a lot of times it's just full throttle runs. So we're really only looking at this part here because that's where people want to get the most power. That's where you will get the most power as far as a horsepower number. But also when you're on the street and you are just giving her, that's where it's going to be, right? So all this other area is left untouched, essentially. But this area is where your streetability is, right? We can tune for max horsepower here, great. We can then tune in here for streetability. So now that you know that this is max horsepower, what is the other range? So the other range is 30 to 50% throttle at cruising speed. Do you know what RPM you run in fifth gear going down the highway? Well, you would have to know based on your car and your gearing setup. But generally speaking, we're going to be talking about this range right here that's highlighted in blue. That is your cruising range. The thing that led me to look at this in the first place was that my Skyline shot fireballs every time I let off the gas and stepped on the gas again. Every single time. And it's cool sometimes, but if it's doing it all the time, you know you're just throwing fuel out the window and wasting money. So what I did was I leaned out this tune. So you can do that quite easily. So I can go like this and I can take fuel away from this area. And there's no good number. It's a trial and error thing. So I would pull a little bit off and then you can check your air fuel ratio. You know, we're around 14, 15, 16, 13. So keep in mind air fuel ratio, the lower the number, the more fuel you have going into the engine. Okay, because it's a ratio of air to fuel. So I have one fuel molecule, and up here at idle, I have 17 air molecules, right? 17 to 1 air fuel ratio. Down here at full throttle, revving this thing out at 6,400 RPM, I have one fuel molecule and I have only 10 air molecules. So I have less air molecules, which makes it so that this one fuel is more concentrated. That's essentially what this is. So I know it's a little bit backwards from what people think. Bigger numbers doesn't mean more fuel. Less numbers mean more fuel. So we're still in a safe range here for cruising. Now, this is already at minus 21. I would turn this range down too, just because, a few points. In here, I actually leaned this out 2 points. Just as a general overall, just lean it out and see what happens. Then I go to my ignition, and the first thing I do is immediately add 2 degrees of ignition advance to every single cylinder. Why? Because We already talked about how the old days we would just turn the distributor cap and gain about 2 degrees of advance. 2 degrees is very safe, but it does give you a noticeable improvement. So you can add 2 degrees to everything. Now if you want, in your full acceleration, and I like to grab these 3 cells, I would also add 2 more degrees, run 4 degrees of advance, and then try it and see what happens. The thing that we're listening for is knock. If we get knock, you let go of the gas pedal quickly, you go back to your computer and you add timing. And we shouldn't have to add much. We can, pull timing on here. So we're gonna pull the timing, I'll pull 1 degree out. 3 degrees of advance is totally okay. 3 to 4, no problem. A lot of guys would be at 6, 7, 8 degrees before you're starting to get into pushing the edge of that limit. The other thing that you can do is pull timing, add timing in your cruising range just to help you burn that fuel and allow it to get a little bit hotter. We are already leaning it out a little bit, which we did on the other map, but we're gonna add another degree of timing there just to help that out. If you do just these things, you have a very good streetable tune. Your car will actually come alive in the mid-range. So when you're just kind of part throttle and then you step it, you punch on it, it will accelerate quicker, it'll respond smoother, and just the drivability will be greatly improved. Once we're done all this, we've got our program, then you need to save it. So we're gonna save ROM image, and I'm going to call this GT Canada R30 or RB20 DET. And I like to call them revisions. So this is revision 1. This is our first iteration of it. Once you've done that, you would then go to your software that would have come with your programmer. You will burn it to the chip or write it to the chip and then go plug it into your ECU. And that's it, start the car. The one thing to watch out for, and this caught me a few times, especially on the Skyline. So there's a 10mm nut in the middle that holds the harness into the ECU. Make sure that is tight, very, very tight. I had done one tune once. It should have been a good tune. I put it on and the car ran like crap. It was really lumpy and I thought I had broke something. I pulled it out, checked the chip, didn't make any sense, reflashed it, put it on, and it was still lumpy. And ultimately the nut was snug, but it wasn't tight. When I turned it about another quarter turn, it just pulled it in that much tighter, everything connected up, and the car ran beautifully, and I ran it like that for a long time while I owned that car. And that tune actually ended up becoming what I called the stinky tune, which is what I had created on the GTR forums for Canada, because we've had these cars 10 years longer than you guys have it in America. And on those forums, I showed all of this same information, but a lot of guys were like, I don't want to do that myself. Can you do it for me? So I said, okay, sure. And I programmed them, made them, sold them to guys, and I had a little side thing going, just kind of tuning computers, tuning Skylines for guys. And it worked out really well. We had a lot of guys running my stinky tune. So this was the process I went through in tuning that. It is trial and error. You have to program it, try it in the car, run it down the street. There's an app now called Speed Logic Lite. It's free. They do have a full paid version as well. And in Speed Logic Lite, you can do 0 to 60 runs and see how much time it takes. So before you do your tune, you can go and do a bunch of 0 to 60 runs, see how long that takes, get the average so you have a good idea how quickly your car does that. And then you can go do your tune and then go back and do 0 to 60 runs and see what that difference ends up being. It's not gonna be a lot. You're not gonna be like a second faster, but you might be half a second faster. Where the big changes are gonna be will be in your streetability. Just driving it around the car will be more fun if you just do those basic changes that I just showed you there. Plus you'll be able to rev it higher, you'll have a higher top speed. If you end up out at the track somewhere, you can show off that new top speed of yours and so on. So I hope this video helped you out. Again, the guys who really know what they're doing and they do this every day are gonna watch this video and say, Anton, that is so simplistic. Why are you encouraging people to blow up their engines? Leave this to the professionals. The truth is, the settings that I just showed you are well within the safe range, and yes, the professionals can do that too, A professional can take you further. They can push you closer to the edge. All I've done is shown you how to get away from the safe zone that the manufacturers start with and get somewhere between the safe zone and the edge. But you should be nowhere near the edge with the changes that I've shown you today, which means your car should still be safe. I'm assuming your car is in good repair. If it's in crappy repair, you shouldn't be starting with tuning. You should be changing your spark plugs, fixing your coil packs, and doing an oil change first. Once the engine's running good, then go and start playing around with these settings and start extracting some extra power and breathing new life into that car of yours. Tell me what you think in the comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you did try it, let us know what you did to try this out and what those results were. I'd love to hear that. I do read all of the comments and I respond to most of them. Don't forget to check out some of our other videos over here. We got lots of great automotive themed videos, a lot of entertainment in that area, some reaction videos and so on. But we've also got some technology videos, which you might find interesting on your downtime in between working on your car and driving around. I do hope to see you again, but until next time, have a good day.